Okay, thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everybody. It's such a pleasure to see all of you. And this is a fantastic, I'm so fascinated by this tech world. I am not a techie, but I'm a fan of technology. And I'm Sara Davila, and I'm a sociologist by training and anthropologist and philosopher by temperament. And I'm currently the chair of Basic Income Earth Network. So I come from the basic income community. So unconditional is a word that is very sacred to me. And it's really a pleasure that a group like this is really deliberating on this topic. I think before the panel begins, a couple of observations I would like to make, but I don't know, after the introduction, maybe I'll get a chance to speak about conditional versus unconditional. Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here.
Absolutely. And Bia, would you like to introduce yourself? And thanks so much for joining and making the time today.
Sure, I'm Bea. Can you hear me? Yeah? Yeah, okay. I'm Bea from Dada. I'm an artist. And we have a community, a large community of artists, and a platform in which people speak to each other through drawings. So it's a completely new way of communicating through art while creating collaborative art. And so we realized that we had this amazing community, these beautiful relations that were being forged, and knew that if we wanted to make it sustainable, any business or any traditional business model will destroy the creativity and the relations, and because there was no extrinsic reward whatsoever within that system. And so we basically are building an economy called invisible economy, which is, and Sparrow is part of it, which is basically creating a space in which we can protect intrinsic motivations. And that means that we have to completely separate, in this case, the market from anything that is making art, but anything, the code, the ideas, everything. And so we've been a year and a half since we presented the paper, living the invisible economy, so working without no money whatsoever, because if we had raised investment and we hire people, then you get into all those dynamics. So everybody's contributing for intrinsic reasons. And we are at the point in which we're starting to figure out the distribution. The invisible economy is about protecting intrinsic rewards. And we always say that we will have a basic income as a way of distributing the minimum that people need so that they can actually focus on the intrinsic rewards, and realizing that basic income is actually very, very limited and not necessarily the best way forward. And so, yeah, so we've learned a lot. Happy to have that conversation here. And the one thing that I would say is that what I've learned personally is that any incentive is a form of coercion. Yeah, it's a form of coercion. So designing anything with that in mind is a manipulative act, and you cannot incentivize people to be generous, and you cannot have leaderboards for generosity. So I think that's an important thing to understand.
Thank you, Bia, for your thoughts. And Sparrow, can we hear a little bit from you? Where are you in the world? And tell us a bit about yourself, and maybe anything you want to touch on initially on unconditional and what this means to you.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Sparrow. I'm an artist. I'm also have been a software engineer for 25 years, an artist all my life, but never took that really seriously until a few years ago. And then making the decision to focus on art really changed my whole life. It brought me to blockchain. It allowed me to connect with, really incredible, brilliant ideas and people. I stayed because of the people. I'm an artist on data. I've been helping build the invisible economy along with Bea and lots of others over these past 18 months. I think that one thing that I would add to what Bea said is another one of the insights that we have found while really going deep and pulling apart how all of this stuff works. And that is, if you're trying to encourage anything that requires creativity and collaboration, you cannot have anything that makes people compete against each other. And even if, you know, even if you do want to reward people's contributions, there's no way in that kind of environment that you can isolate someone's contributions from someone else's contributions, because the actual contribution is an amalgamation of all of the different things that needed to happen to make that possible. And so all of the reward systems, when you're talking about fairness and fairly rewarding people, really need to reward as a group, right? Because it's everyone in that system that has made that possible. And to me, that's one of the keys of fairness.
Very interesting perspective. And yeah, earlier, Daniel Ospina also gave a great talk, and he brought up unconditional systems, or how he called it kind of minimum viable salary. And of course, here we're talking in the context of Web3 and DAOs, and also acknowledging, you know, quieter kind of personalities and how some of these reward systems operate, and different cycles of work. So yeah, I suppose, Sarath, I'm really curious to hear about your work with Basic Income Earth Network. And I think, you know, especially talking with certain generations, and if you look at, Daniel also brought up, you know, productivity versus relationship oriented communities and different cultures. So you hear, just to address some of the general resistance to UBI or unconditional systems is, you know, well, people will get lazy and they won't work and they won't be productive. What other, I guess, what would you like to say to some of this resistance? Or like, why do you think we feel the need to be so productive all the time? And that this is the basis for whether or not maybe people have basic access to, you know, meet their needs or whatnot?
Yeah, I think quickly I will drop the word rewards in my presentation, because I think rewards is a word. I mean, if you agree that, you know, there is master's language and the slave language, and rewards comes from the master's language. He's giving the carrot and he's dangling the carrot. Now, conditional and unconditional is a binary, which is like. If you, I mean, it's used at different levels. At first level, I think the cash transfer language, they say conditional cash transfer and unconditional cash transfer. But then if you take it to the next level, abstract level, it is philosophical level, it is actually a metaphor. Like conditional represents the market economy, the contractual economy, the industrial culture, and which is also based on mistrust, because it has conditional means it is conditional upon your performance, conditional upon your eligibility, conditional upon you providing a certain outcome. Whereas unconditional, so this is market economy, and unconditional comes from the moral economy of unconditionally giving something. Now, what happened in history has been to relegate the unconditional part into the private domain, and public square, you can only talk the contractual language. But I think today we have come to a situation in our technological development, like in the 17th century when Copernicus said that the earth is round. I think it went against the grain of that particular moment, and I think he went against the system. The church actually said that he should be prohibited and banned. Today, we have come to a situation, I think the blockchain technology and the crypto world is threatening national sovereignties, which is actually a good sign, which means that this has this huge potential of taking forward the truth. Now, in that situation, I feel that an unconditional basic income is the ground on which the future mankind has to stand. It's a necessity, not a luxury. It is because the labor market all over the world is shrinking. I think the more we see the statistics, the more we realize that there are no jobs to have in future. I think the production system, the business models are all going to say that we need fewer and fewer human beings, which is not a threat, but it's an opportunity actually for what Bia and Sparrow is saying. I completely understand, I completely in that world. So the point is that, okay, when that happens, the technology is capable of providing a decent living for the entire mankind. I think, shall we take that on board? That is number one. And I'll close here saying that when we have such a tremendous responsibility and we are threatening the sovereignty of national sovereignty, the central banks are worried. In fact, I think the crypto bill is in the Indian Parliament today. I think by January, we will know whether they're going to take the China route or they're going to take another route. I think there is also tremendous responsibility on people who are doing this to have an ethical integrity and a moral high ground. If that is not there, I think we have lost the opportunity. I think those who are doing this, I think have a tremendous civilizational burden to use a different language, a different discourse, a different way of connecting, and unconditionality is the metaphor for the future. I would stop there.
I can add to that. I agree. What I will say is that to me, it is still within the rationality that of the structures that exist. Like I want to think about a future. I'm an anarchist, not an ultra-capitalist anarchist like most people in the blockchain, but a social anarchist. So for me, as nation states, I mean, it's great that they're being challenged, but it's not great the way they're being challenged, because at the end, it's like even more risky what we're doing on the blockchain, because it's the same mentality, same structures, same economic models, same incentives, same everything, only that unregulated and without any, even more efficient with the systems. So to me, in order to get to that place that you're talking about, we have to leave behind all of it, all of that. And that's, I think, the hardest part. The biggest challenge is that most people can't imagine a world without money as we know it, can't imagine a world without the markets. Competition becomes human nature. So, like greedy becomes human nature. There's nothing you can do. People affect, the systems are great, then there's people, and then people affect the systems. But when it's actually the opposite, it's the system which is producing a certain behavior. We behave in those systems in a certain way, and it gives the outcomes that, as Sparrow always says, the outcomes of the systems are the outcomes that the system wants. And so I think for us, at least, even when it comes to the unconditional basic income that we proposed in the beginning, unless people actually have crossed that bridge, that mindset shift into this new kind of thinking, that you can actually imagine a different thing, that becomes maybe, great just for not leaving anyone behind, but not enough to actually move to a new, more, I don't want to say fair, but yeah, nurturing place, more caring place.
Caring.
It was Kevin, I think, who said just earlier today, you don't tear down the existing system, you build a new system off, separate. And that's what's going to supplant the old system. And one of the things that I think we have found is that any participation in the old system just reinforces those structures. And that's the opposite to what we want to be doing. We want to be building something of our own with different outcomes, a completely different system, not reinforcing the existing structures.
It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge because it's the mindset that is the hardest to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just a small response to that is that I think the choice is not between the two extremes of staying in the system and perpetuating it and staying outside the system. I mean, I would say that between the market and the moral economy, there is something called a caring economy. And I think I agree with what Sparrow has said, that it is not by tearing down the existing structure, existing system, but it is actually erecting a new system that automatically breaks down the old system. It makes it redundant. And how this is going to happen, I think it can happen only by having this kind of a community of those who believe in a utopia.
So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just start firing questions now because it's a very active chat going on. So we have a few that are kind of more conceptual and a few that are practical, as a lot of people here are, building and creating and designing these systems. So the first one is from Ronka Thompson. Did you want to open up your mic and ask your question? She was asking for Sarath. What do you mean by ethical integrity?
Well, ethical integrity is that when you are doing something as significant and as historical, I mean, civilizationally historical, you have the burden to ensure that what you're doing is for the good of humanity, for the good of the last human there, for the good of to get rid of the toxicity that we have inherited so far. I think that kind of a burden is there upon your shoulders. That is the moral high ground you should have. Otherwise, you shouldn't be doing something as serious as this.
And to Bia and Sparrow, Livia is saying, a lot of times that intrinsic motivation has kind of been a privilege in the past. So how can we start to transition from these like extrinsic reward systems to more inclusive, intrinsic enabling systems? Or can we have a hybrid? I know you're kind of on the spectrum of, intrinsic only. Daniel brought up that it's possible that we could maybe have a hybrid. What are your thoughts on that? And how do we do it?
So I'll start. Yeah. This was something I did a very deep dive into, and I came across research paper after research paper after research paper, decades and decades of research studies that all said effectively the same thing, mostly in education, which is where most of the research has been done. But in other areas as well. And I think it does point to a universal truth. And that is, as soon as you begin to introduce extrinsic rewards, you diminish and at least have the potential to completely erase intrinsic motivation. And so the only way to protect intrinsic motivation is the absence of extrinsic reward. And what we've found over this time is actually that all of our systems from the time we go to kindergarten, all of the culture is based around these extrinsic rewards. And so people lose touch even with what their intrinsic motivations are. And it is a process of reconnecting. And it takes a lot of individual work for people to understand what their intrinsic motivation actually is. Because most people can't identify that still quiet voice inside themselves that's calling them to do something just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, and I will add to that intrinsic and extrinsic, I mean, it's still binary, right? Like it's still, very specific, and there are other dimensions to that. And there's also tricky aspects, like there are ways in which deadlines could be beneficial for intrinsic rewards, but there are specific moments in specific ways. But in general, that is what we found. That's the essence of the invisible economy. At the moment that you replace the intrinsic for extrinsic rewards, the intrinsic diminish and disappear, which in our case, it really kills creativity, right? So, and art and innovation, which is extremely important for this ecosystem. So what I would say is that I think it's very hard for people to imagine that you can even separate those things. We actually made the exercise of going and saying there is a path of the same, fulfilling the same need that is intrinsic, these are the outcomes, and there is a path you can fulfill the same need, extrinsic, and here's the outcome. And it's very clear that you can separate those. And there's also another myth, I think, from Livia's question, the idea there is a privilege. We sometimes get this from people like, you're mostly, in Europe and the US, you may not need money. That's why you can invest so much time doing this for intrinsic rewards. And there's a part of it that is true, but somebody like Sparrow is, she has a full-time job and a million other projects. She just decides to do this instead of doing something else. And it's also true that our artists are mostly from Latin America, and they're like in very rural places. And there they are putting hours and hours and hours of their time drawing on data. And so, and they have, working class jobs. Sometimes they don't have jobs. They're in survival mode, a lot of them. Yet that it's like so vital. Like it's almost like what makes them survive is the fact that they're like making art. So it's a myth that is a privilege, but it is true that you need a minimum. So if you're like really stressed out about paying rent, you're never really gonna get there. We need a different rhythm for like a 30-minute panel. It's like the kind of thing that is like, this conversation will probably be best at over the hour, right? So we need to change the way we actually live in the world in order to be really into this path of fulfilling what you want.
Yeah, I can just say I've lost touch with my intrinsic motivation, and I'm trying to get it back because I've been doing work for money for so long that I don't even know what I enjoy anymore. So this resonates a lot with me, and I think with a lot of people here. Sarath, I know you have something, and then I wanted to open up the floor.
Quickly on this, that I think we have to disrupt this binary of intrinsic versus extrinsic, because I think extrinsic satisfaction or reward is also a desire that comes from inside, but it need not be just a desire, but it could be a need. I mean, your material conditions are such that you just can't afford to ignore the extrinsic reward. So I think it all comes back to the industrial culture that we live in, where the insecurity has become the characteristic feature of our lives, and the precarity has become the norm of our lives across the world. Now, that kind of a precarious situation results in a mind which is so insecure that it is like what earlier you said, Davia, that or you, Jessica, you also just said that it doesn't give us an opportunity to reflect and pause and listen to what we want inside, deep inside, and also to learn the power of that. Now, I can't tell a construction worker he has to feed his family, and I can't say. I think it is that cynicism that comes and says that this is just a luxury. But I think we are looking towards a society where it is possible to reduce that insecure mind, to to mitigate that insecurity and allow the minds to flourish. I think the binary also will vanish. And I don't, that's all.
Can
Yeah,
I?
One recent, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I
was
just
just
want to
gonna say-
disagree. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add one recent learning that we have found through thinking about distribution has been that actually that security that you talk about, absolutely essential. That's the first step. That is the basis. Yeah. But what we found is that the answer to providing that security is not money. It's actually the relationships, the connections, the community, right? That can do that in a much, much more stable and secure way than just money.
Yeah, what I was going to add, because you said something that I completely disagree about Sarath, but then the outcome of that is what I agree. It's about safety and the fact that people live precariously. But it's a myth that the extrinsic rewards actually are the answer, or that satisfies that need, because then we get into the territory of, oh yeah, I make money so that I can be independent and free. And it's actually the more money you make, the more you're embedded in this system, the more imprisoned you feel on both sides. Whether you're on the precarious side, of course, but if you're on the master side, it's the same. And you feel it for different reasons, but you feel imprisoned. And so this myth that I work hard, I get money so that I am free and independent, while in fact we removed money and we removed the direct extrinsic rewards, and now we feel free. For those of us who are actually in the invisible economy, and yes, we're still privileged, but the whole point is like, how do we move it so that people who are living precarious life can actually get to the place in which they have more than money, which is a community that is like a safety net, that is like, says, you're not gonna fall from here. Here we are, right? And so I think it comes back to, we have to ditch the idea that we need money, that we really have to go deeper to what is it that we need, and provide a space for that.
A quick thing to that, Bia, I'm completely in agreement. I think we're on the same side. Basic income is, the way we are talking about basic income, the way we define basic income is hardly about money. It's about the unconditionality. It's about the care. It's about the individual care. All that. I think the whole ecosystem, the psychological atmosphere, that the way basic income in its pure form will be implemented is that society we are all talking about. I think we have come to fetishize the external rewards to such an extent that we have lost contact with what is not a non-fetish life.
We have just another few minutes. Sadly, I think we could definitely hold this conversation. But I wanted to, I wanted to share a comment by Aloysius and just read it quickly. Aloysius, I know, or you have a lot to say on this topic. When she said, you reward people for the value you're assuming they bring, and that their souls are in limbo, making sense of self-worth in correlation to the current cultural norms and coming up short because they're not perfect. I just thought that was so powerful. I wish we had more time, but I want to just take a few of our last minutes here. And I'm so sorry, Aloysius, I really wanted to hear more from you. Angela, I don't know if we have a few extra minutes, but in the last few minutes, I just wanted to hear from you all. We had many people watching that are building these systems that are currently in this 3-month research initiative with Governauts to look at reward system. What is your advice for them, and how can they kind of implement some of this into these systems? What are some kind of practical things that they can do in their systems design, or how can they start to move in this direction? Because it is a spectrum.
Yeah, well, I start because for me, it's not a spectrum. I'm super, super radical about these things. There's no way we can get anything out. Like you said, Sarath, you said like we have to we live in utopia. we're living a reality within data and the invisible economy is real. What we live in is real. And so to me, when people tell us like, oh, that sounds like utopia, well, it is real. You just have to come and contribute. You'll see it. What is delusional for me is to think that you can have any other outcome with the systems that we have now. So for me, ditch everything. Ditch all the best practices, ditch all the thinking about incentives mechanisms, ditch everything, ditch all the words, because once you get deep into it, we don't even have words that are not completely coerced by productivity and transactionality. And so how are we going to build something when we don't even have the words to express what is it that we want? And so I think, yeah, bring everything, work on yourself, basically. That's the first thing.
Absolutely. Bia, I think we should have a full day seminar on this. And I think as Bia, and we will organize this, and Sparrow and Aloysius and Bia will be there, and Jessica. Now, I think all of us are living in utopias, definitely. The only difference is whether I am living in Mark Zuckerberg's utopia, Trump's utopia, or Aloysius' utopia, or Sparrow's utopia. That is the only difference. But that's the only difference. We're all living in a story, but the point is, whose story is that? Okay, I think to answer to the question about the ethical thing is that I think all human beings are endowed with something called conscience. And I think when you are designing something, listen to that conscience. And if the voice is too weak, spend time to get to that voice. And I think it's the inner voice that will tell you what to do and what not to do. And it is nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with spirituality. All of us have the inner voice. That's all. That's my last word on that.
Sparrow, any final words?
Sorry, on mute. I would just really stress that the environment, the system that you're in determines the outcomes. It determines the behavior of the people in the system, so it determines the outcomes. And so if you look at the outcomes we've been getting in the current system, we cannot expect to get any different outcomes from those systems. We can make all of the tweaks that we want to tweak. We can add layers and bells and whistles. But if that underlying environment, that underlying system is the same, you're going to keep getting the same results.
Thank you so much.
But
Thank you
Sparrow, the blockchain is one prick. This bubble is going to burst. Good night.
At the moment in blockchain, we are recreating the same systems that we had in the pre-blockchain world.
I have to intervene here.
To develop some new patterns.
And I have to intervene here and say, blockchain is the future, Mr. Sarath, at the thing, and we can rebuild the whole thing bottom up in a very fair way, and blockchain gives that opportunity.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, look at the results.
No, it's
this is
one
of the most unequal systems so far.
This is the very early beginning, very early beginning. It's for us to build it.
I believe that it is possible.
Yeah, I think
I live with that hope.
Well, I do. But I think we can't afford to be naive. And so we have to see the results. We've been working on blockchain for 4 years or more. We have to see the results.
But I think on a broader scale, Bia, I think behind every technology there are hierarchies. The point is that who is actually deciding, who is taking the call, who is taking the final call. So I think if there one can make the moral difference, I think that's where the hope lies.
I think we are missing the whole thing. DAOs are exactly about what you just mentioned. It can create the hierarchy-less systems. Tiny DAOs bottom up.
It's not doing that.
No, so, it can be done.
It could, of course. That's why I put so much of my years in this technology. But it's not like, let's not be naive. Like it's not just the technology. It's like it's the economic models, it's the governance models, all of that embedded needs to be different. It's not just the technology.
No, nobody's saying it's only the technology. It's the way you build it. And once you have decentralized trust, it is trust where you can tokenize any form of value. You can rebuild the whole economic structure the way you want it.
Well, you're scaring me, actually.
you better be.
Who can scare an anarchist? Who can scare an anarchist?
Only a bigger anarchist.
That mentality, yeah.
Only a bigger anarchist.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Wonderful.
everyone.